Hi, this is Starkey Sowers. Welcome again to another Plus Program training series. Today's topic, gluten and gluten-free. So with that said, there's a lot of interest. In session number 1, we talked about gluten-free. We talked about different types of gluten sensitivities and gluten complications such as celiac, gluten reactive situations, gluten allergies, all these different types of complications that go with it. So what is gluten anyways? Well, gluten, as we were saying before, is a protein, and it's typically found in what we call the wheat family. So it's going to be wheat, it's going to be rye, it's also going to be barley, it's also going to be triticale. And in some situations, gluten can be found in oats, but that's typically because of cross-contamination. Well, you might be thinking, well, I've not been diagnosed with gluten, so what's it going to take if I choose to go on a gluten-free diet? So number 1, I can't emphasize more than anything else, you've got to read the labels. If you don't read labels, you're never going to be able to go gluten-free because there's so much gluten in so many different types of foods, you're not going to be able to identify it unless you're reading labels. There's a truckload of gluten. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at different types of gluten foods. And when we think of these gluten foods, remember, they're just about everywhere. So if we think about gluten foods, we're thinking about breads, we're thinking about pastas, we're thinking about bagels, we're thinking about muffins, we're thinking about crackers, we're thinking about cereals, we're thinking about just everything that's probably at a convenience factor in your cupboards somewhere. So what happens is this is just, as we were saying, a truckload of different types of foods are going to have gluten or gluten byproducts in them. One of the things I always like to do is focus on what can I do, not so much as what can't I do. So now we know what foods have gluten in them and possibly what you're not going to want to do. The big question is, what can I do and how do I achieve this result, so to speak? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at foods that ultimately have no gluten in them. Once again, definitely read labels if these foods are mixed with other different types of ingredients, because on those labels, you're going to find that gluten has slipped into a truckload of things. So let's start at the top of the list. First of all, a whole foods diet is the number one thing I'm always striving for you to do anyways. So on the top of the list, when we look at it, we typically want to replace grains with something. So in this situation, we are replacing wheat and the wheat families. So what do we have as our choices? Number 1 on the list would be corn. Number 2 would be rice. I like brown rice because brown rice has a bunch of nutrients that you're typically going to lack. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So brown rice would definitely be the culprit. Second or third on the list when it comes to grains would also be quinoa and amaranth. A lot of you guys might have gone into a restaurant and noticed that quinoa is popping up everywhere. It's the new superfood. It's also the thing that's voguing replacing wheat. And a lot of people are focusing their time and attention on quinoa and amaranth. All right, so what about fruits and vegetables? Vegetables, there's no vegetable that has any gluten in it. So think of yams, think of potatoes, think of all the root vegetables, including carrots, parsnips, beets, and all those particular ingredients, no gluten whatsoever. Then all the green leafy vegetables as well too. Anything that you can think that's green and that's a vegetable doesn't have gluten. And then when it comes to fruits, all fruits don't have gluten either. So the list is starting to grow, isn't it? You're starting to feel a little bit more comfortable. There's a lot of foods out there that are gluten-free. All right, so next on the list from there, let's look at nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds have no gluten in them either. Milk and milk products, eggs have no gluten in them as well too. So then also when we look at other different things such as oils and derivatives of different things, there's no gluten in those as well too. So the list, as I was saying, is just growing numerous, as well as legumes such as chickpea, garbanzo beans, all those different things, no gluten. All right, so that gives you a complete arsenal of all the yes foods. So we should be in a good position to where we're starting to be able to go, oh, I'm breathing a little bit better. I definitely know that I'm in a position where I don't have to be able to be confined to just eating gluten foods. Like I was telling you, the biggest thing here is you're going to want to read labels, especially when it comes to packaged and when it comes to processed foods. These are going to be the big entities, so to speak, that you've got to watch and prevent yourself from getting those gluten things into your diet. All right, so that kind of gives you a good foundation, a solid foundation to go with. So one of you guys might be thinking at least this question. What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages, so to speak, when it comes to gluten-free diets? So here's the advantages. Number 1, I think the biggest advantage is everyone does exactly what I was saying. They start reading labels. they start looking at things and go, oh, wow, that's got wheat in it. It's got gluten in it. The other thing that starts popping up, they go, oh my gosh, look at this. It's got a truckload of sugar in it. It's got a bunch of this, or it's got a bunch of that. Well, I should probably avoid that because it's not good for me. So what we have a tendency to do when we go on a gluten-free diet, and one of the reasons why it's so popular and one of the reasons why so many people are losing weight on it, is they're starting to pay attention to what they eat. So this would be, in my opinion, the number one thing that becomes such a success when doing a gluten-free diet, or any diet for that choice, when you start paying attention to what you're eating and what's on the label. All right, are there any disadvantages? Yes, there are a couple disadvantages. Number one, wheat being everywhere. In fact, 30% of the United States population being sensitive in one way, shape, form, or the other, or rather 15% being sensitive to gluten in one way, shape, form, or the other, when they eliminate it, have a tendency to be in a situation where they start lacking certain nutrients. As you might remember, wheat is typically fortified, so they've got vitamins and minerals that are added to it. So what does this mean? It means that you might be lacking some vitamins and minerals. So that becomes a critical issue. The other issue that I think is a real problem is when you just start saying, no, I can't eat this and I can't eat that, and you don't have that yes list. You definitely want to have that yes list because you might not be in a situation where you're getting enough calories to be able to maintain your weight or things of that nature. So be in a position where you're being heads up on this. Finally, if you are doing a gluten-free diet, you might want to consider using a multivitamin because a multivitamin might help make up the gap, so to speak, for some of those nutrients that you aren't getting. All right, so this kind of lays a foundation on what gluten is, what gluten-free would be all about, and maybe just give you a little head start if you decided that you're going to do a gluten-free diet, or maybe just be in a situation where you understand what gluten is and maybe restrict it. We appreciate you watching another Plus Program training series. Thanks again.